Greetings, friends and brethren. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Continuing Church of God. And today we're doing the fourth part of our six-part series covering the book of the law, the book of Deuteronomy, during the Feast of Tabernacles, as is commanded in Deuteronomy chapter 31. In the prior three sermons, we covered the first 16 chapters. So we're going to dig right in. Chapter 17, New King James Version, starting verse 1. You shall not sacrifice to the Lord your God a bull or a sheep which has any blemish or defect, for that's an abomination to the Lord your God. So let me just stop here. A lot of times when they went to do the sacrifices, it's like a public thing. And some people are like, okay, I got to do this because if I don't do it, people are going to notice. So they'll use whatever, the worst animal they've got to get away with it. And that's not what God wants. God wants our best, okay? Our best efforts, our true commitment, not just, okay, I have to do this, so I'm doing what I have to do. It's because everybody's going to see me, and I really have to do what I'm supposed to do. And it's okay to put on a smile and to try to encourage people, even if you're not feeling super well. But you're still supposed to, again, do your best. All right, number 2, verse 2. If there's found among you, within any of your gates, which the Lord your God gives you, a man or a woman who's been wicked in the sight of the Lord your God in transgressing his covenant, who has gone and served other gods and worshipped either the sun or the moon or any of the hosts of heaven, if I have not commanded, and it is told you, and you hear of it, then you shall inquire diligently, and indeed, true and certain, such an abomination has been committed in Israel. You shall bring out to the gates that man or woman who has committed that wicked thing, and shall stone that man or woman with stones. So you see, they were just as tough on the women as the men. In modern times, we've got people who worship the sun and the moon and the stars and all that kind of stuff, but they try to make it appear to be fun. And, now, we don't currently get a newspaper anymore, and probably many of you don't anymore because you have the internet and all that. But when there were newspapers that we were getting, almost always they had horoscopes in them, which they considered fun, and you got people doing this. Of course, we don't go out and shoot people for doing that, but people should not be doing it. And, some people say, well, it's just a fun thing to do. Well, it's not appropriate. The Bible warns against astrology, and if you're reading it, don't think you don't get influenced by it. All right, verse 6. Whoever is deserving of death shall be put to death by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. He shall not be put to death on the testimony of one witness. And so you've got a situation that even if someone's got a good reputation, you're not supposed to just say that one person, that's all to end all, and you can't kill somebody based on it. It says in Romans 3:23, all have sinned and falling short of the glory of God. And even people who should have a good reputation sometimes can fall. So something as serious as putting somebody to death, the Bible said you had to have at least 2 or 3 witnesses. But Jesus also said by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, things should be confirmed, if you will. And I may get to that a little bit later. Verse 7, the hands of the witnesses shall be first against him to put him to death. Afterwards, the hands of all the people, so you shall put away evil among you. Verse 8, now if it happens, the matter rises up, it's too hard for you to judge between degrees of guilt for the bloodshed, between one judgment and another, or between one punishment and another, matters of controversy within your gates, then you should arise, and you should go up to the place which the Lord your God chooses. And there shall come to the priests, the Levites, the judge in the days, and inquire of them. And they shall pronounce upon you the sentence of judgment. You shall do according to the sentence which they pronounce upon you in that place which the Lord chooses. You should be careful to do according to what they left from the sentence which they pronounce against you. Now, if the man who acts presumptuously will not heed the priest who stands to minister before the Lord your God, or the judge, that man shall die, so you should put away evil from Israel. And all the people shall hear and fear and no longer act presumptuously. Now, this has some modern applications. Before I go to a modern one, I want to go to an older one. You don't have to go there, but the book of Jeremiah chapter 42, what happens is people go up to Jeremiah and say, Jeremiah, we know you're God's guy. Hey, should we go to Egypt or should stay here? What should we do? And whatever God says through you, we know you're God's prophet. Whatever God tells you to do, we'll do. Okay, we'll do it, no matter which way it is. So Jeremiah goes out and prays, and he gets an answer. Then he comes back, then he tells them. And then they say, "Oh, God didn't speak to you. We don't like that answer." Okay, basically, he told God, through Jeremiah, said, "Don't go back to Egypt." And they've decided that's what they wanted to do. And so they were hoping that they would get the answer that they wanted. Kind of reminds me of what happens in modern times. There's something called minister shopping. And because of different splits of groups all over the place, if someone doesn't like the answer in one COG group, they go to another one. It could be why there's a certain group that's very large who will ignore certain rules about marrying, remarriage, and various other things that they do. Because people minister shop to try to get answers. But the Bible's saying if you're inquiring, you're supposed to respond. Now, it's possible you could get a wrong answer from the ministry, and I've heard some in the past, but basically, unless the minister is giving you an answer that's contrary to Scripture, if you've asked, you should pretty much try to follow it. On the other hand, sometimes people will ask me questions, and I don't give them an answer that they want to hear. What I mean by that isn't because they wanted a yes or a no, but because I'm going to give them some type of a maybe. And they don't like that. Now, why would I give some type of maybe? Well, let's see. 1, I don't know all their circumstances. 2, I only know what they told me at the time. And 3, I'm not sure. And if I'm not sure, I try to make it clear that I'm not sure. And if I am sure, I try to make it clear that I am sure. So, again, people ask, generally speaking, they should follow the advice that they're given. But again, sometimes they won't get a full answer. And again, for example, if you ask me what you should do for a living, pull that off out of the sky, I don't know. I've been asked that question several times. I'll ask somebody a little bit about their background. I'll make a few suggestions where they should perhaps look at, but that's not something that I know. I'll just use that off the top of my head. Well, anyway, let's go to verse 14. When you come to the land which the Lord your God has given you, and possess it and dwell in it, and say, I'll set a king over me like the nations that are around me. You shall surely set a king over you, the Lord your God chooses. One from among your brethren you shall set the king over you. You may not set a foreigner over you who is not your brother. But he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses. For the Lord your God has said to you, you shall not return that way again. And again, I just mentioned to you that they wanted to go back in Jeremiah's time. Neither shall he multiply wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, and he shall... okay, we'll just stop there. And we know, when you read other scriptures, that Solomon didn't obey this particular one, and as it turns out, his heart was turned away from him. Nor shall he greatly multiply silver or gold for himself. And it shall be when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself a copy of this law in a book from one before the priests, the Levites. So he's got to write this down. Now, I've seen teenage gals who seem to be able to use their cell phones and text underneath desks without even looking. They seem to do that pretty fast. And my wife used to be able to type fairly fast. She still does, but probably not as fast as when she used to have to do more of that. We're not talking about something like this. We're not talking about cutting and pasting. You can go online right now, find a copy of the Bible, click, 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 copy, blah, 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 blah. Not so bad. Oh, no. You had to take out some type of a writing implement. And these type of writing implements, I was looking for one here. Oh, here's one. Did not resemble these things known as ballpoint pens. But there was probably some pointed object, and you dipped it in some ink, and you wrote a letter or so. And if you've looked at Hebrew, you can't write Hebrew like we write in our language, English. As a matter of fact, speaking of English and writing, they no longer teach what's called a cursive or longhand in a lot of schools anymore, which is a way to write. What you may not realize is one of the reasons that was developed was not just so you could write a little bit faster, but because of the type of fountain pens they had with ink, you didn't want to stop. Okay, you wanted to keep going. Otherwise you had these blots all over the place. If you look at Hebrew, there's little dots here and there and squiggles here and there. It's not quite the same as writing Chinese characters, but it's not that different from it either. So it's not like you just scribble this word out. You've got to go. That was one letter. That was another letter. Okay? You can imagine that this took a bit of time. And because it took a bit of time, the king would have a pretty good idea what the law actually says. In my own case, as I've mentioned in the past in some sermons, one of the things that I've found to help me learn and improve things is when I start to write a book, and let me just hold up, for example, the last one we had printed. And this book is available at the ccog.org website. It's free. Go under the Literature tab, Books and Booklets, and you'll find it. Now, this is a pretty thick book. It's almost 400 pages. Now, I wrote this book, and then I did a sermon series on this particular book. And while I was doing the sermon series, it forced me to reread everything I had in here in detail. Plus, gave me time to think about it, and I added more things to it. And while that's not the same as me writing out the book of the law in Hebrew, which I wouldn't understand because I don't understand Hebrew, it did force me to be better acquainted with what I was putting out and to look at it in more depth. And God wanted the ruler, the king, there was one, to actually know what the law said so the king would really know. Not just some crash executive course in the Bible or how to be king. Oh no. It took them a long time. It probably took a year or more to get this done. Okay? And depending on how much time they spent in a day, it would take a long time. God wanted them, the kings, to know the law. And he wants us to know it as well. And it's one of the reasons why every 7 years we're supposed to read it in detail in the book of Deuteronomy, even though you all have Bibles and you can all read it yourself. In the old days, they didn't do that, and that's one reason I've heard that some other people don't do this. Is, well, they didn't have Bibles then, we have them now. And that's fine. But in Nehemiah, it said that not only was it read, it was explained. And that also is what it says in Deuteronomy 31 we're supposed to do. So even though you do have Bibles, we read it and we try to explain it. Okay, getting back to Deuteronomy 17. Verse 19, and it will be with him, and he'll read it all the days of his life. So he wasn't just to spend a whole lot of time writing this thing. He also had to read it. So hopefully, when he wrote it clear enough so he'd understand it, to be able to read it. By the way, it also means the king had to know how to read. That he may learn to fear the Lord his God, and to be careful to observe all the words of the law and the statutes. So we see repeatedly through the book of Deuteronomy, we're supposed to be careful about this, and God wanted the leadership to be careful as well. That his heart may not be lifted above his brethren. I am the king. You people are just, subjects, do whatever we want. And by the way, the same thing applies to the ministry. The best of my knowledge, I don't think no one's come across and told me they think I'm lording it over you. Some people may not agree with some of my decisions. But, as I said before, we eat, we go to services, we tithe, we do things like the rest of you. Okay? We're not supposed to think, and there's a guy out there, I'll probably refer to him later too today, who thinks even if he says things that are wrong, it's okay because God's going to make it happen because he was cut different from all the rest of everybody, he said. And perhaps he is different, but not in the way he thinks. Anyway, he may not have turned aside from the command to the right hand or to the left, that he may prolong his days in the kingdom, he and his children in the midst of Israel. All right, now let's go to chapter 18. The priests and the Levites and all the tribe of Levi shall have no part in the inheritance of Israel, and shall eat the offerings of the Lord made by fire in whose portion. Therefore they have no inheritance among the brethren. The Lord is their inheritance, as he said to them. And this shall be the priest's due from the people, from those who offer a sacrifice, or it's a bull or a sheep. We give the priest the shoulder, the cheeks, and the stomach. And we don't tend to eat the stomachs anymore, but they did. And actually, up until shortly after World War II, in the United States, people ate organ meat all the time. But as we got more prosperous, we stopped doing that. And instead, do you know what they do with it? Do you think they throw that away? Oh, no. That's what's in the dog food and the cat food. By the way, just to let you know. And having raised sheep in the past, I can tell you when a dog kills a sheep, or a coyote kills a sheep, what do? They don't eat the parts that you and I eat, particularly. They don't eat the guts, the organs. They'll eat the rest if they're hungry enough. And if they're just in the mood to kill a sheep, they'll just do that and then eat guts and go away. At least that's what I've noticed, sadly. Verse 4, the first fruits of your grain and your new wine and your oil and the flour, first of the fleece of your sheep, you shall give him. For the Lord your God has chosen him out of your tribes to stand and minister in the name of the Lord, him and his sons forever. So God had this plan. Now, from an economic perspective, this seems to be kind of a weird plan. 1 out of 12 tribes, they don't work. They just are devoted to God. And people are supposed to give 10% of their money plus offerings to them. Seems pretty inefficient from a capitalistic perspective. Doesn't really seem to be socialistic or communistic either. But God had a plan. And the plan involved the Levitical priesthood. And we know in the book of Hebrews that was changed, and we don't have those type of sacrifices anymore, particularly if you read chapters 9 and 10. But God had a plan, and it was a costly plan to do his work back then. Verse 6, so if a Levite comes from many of your gates, and when he dwells among Israel, and comes to the desire of his mind to the place which the Lord chooses, that he may serve the name of the Lord his God, as his brethren the Levites do, to stand before the Lord, they shall have equal portions to eat, beside which comes from the sale of his inheritance. Verse 9, when you come to the land which the Lord your God has given you, you shall not learn to follow the abominations of those nations. There be any found among you who makes his son or daughter to pass through the fire. And what we have now, we had an actress a year or two ago, I don't know, at the Academy Awards or maybe it was the Emmys or the Grammys, I don't know. But basically went up and bragged, you know, if I didn't kill my unborn baby, I could not have been such a great person to get this particular award. So this is a great thing that I did. So therefore, this is a good thing to do. I don't remember her name, and I don't remember the award ceremony. I just read about it. But, you know, back then, they'd sacrifice their kids for some kind of a blessing, think that would help their career. Not the way we think of it, but in their case, they're thinking, okay, well, we'll get rain or something like that. A similar concept to what we see today. Or one who practices witchcraft, or a soothsayer, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who conjures spells, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For all those do these things are an abomination to the Lord. Because of these abominations, the Lord your God drives them out before you. Let me just stop here for a moment. I've been criticized for quoting or referring to non-biblical prophecies. Now, interestingly, when I brought this up to my prior association, they showed me some articles that the old Radio Church of God had put out referring to Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox prophecies the same way that I've done it. And so I was surprised because this stuff came out in like 1963 or 1964. And while I was able to read at that young an age, I never had heard of the Radio Church of God, and I never read the articles. But the Bible warns us, or tells us, the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians 2:11, we're not supposed to be ignorant of Satan's devices. And when we look at what's going to happen to the world and in the world, having read multiple Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, and other prophecies, I can see how Satan's plan is laid out in them. And I'll digress for a moment and just mention this. I did a radio interview back in 2009, I think, for a book I had. And the hostess, she says to me, Well, look, you're talking about like the beast, the false prophet, the Antichrist. Everybody knows all this stuff, and everybody's going to know it when it happens. Because everybody's been warned, basically, she said. And I said, oh no. I said, first of all, you've got Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox prophecies. And at the time of the end, they're looking for a leader to rise up. A leader who will destroy the English-speaking peoples, and a leader who's going to be with a pope who does miracles. Now, this person sounds almost exactly the same as the king of the north we read about in Daniel chapter 11, and the beast we read about in Daniel chapter 13, first 10 verses, and some other portions. So you've got roughly 1.5 to 2 billion Greco-Romans who are going to be looking forward to this individual. So, no, when he rises up, no, they're not going to say, oh, he's the beast. Don't think so. And I said, and this is because I read some other prophecies, then there's something from the Tang Dynasty. This is from China, roughly 700 to 1000 AD. Now, there's a rumor, or legend, I guess would be better, that somehow people who had some connections to the Bible came over to China. And that did happen. Now, whether or not they were Church of God people or not, we don't know. But I think what happened was they talked a little bit about the beast and the false prophet, and the Chinese got a little bit confused. And surely there would be some language issues from anybody coming from the West to China back then. I mean, they didn't have smartphones where you could put in one language and try to talk another or anything like that. Anyway, in the Tang Dynasty, they say that beautiful people are going to come from the West, and that China's going to have a saint. But he's not going to be that good of a person. Well, the Chinese don't really have saints. And so they're actually going to be looking forward to this person rising up. And so you got about 1.5 billion Chinese. And then, what about the Hindus? There's about 1 billion of those. And they're looking for this guy called the Bhagwan Kalki to rise up. He doesn't say he's Hindu. And as a matter of fact, my wife Joyce and I went to Bali, Indonesia once, and I talked to this Hindu guy. Indonesia, by the way, is Muslim, but Bali is not. Okay? They're Hindu. So I was talking to this guy, and I said, the Roman Catholics say that they're going to make a pitch and you guys are going to become part of them. What do you think? I figured I'd ask a Hindu, right? And he said, well, that kind of depends. Yeah, we could probably go for something like that, depending on how they mention it. I thought, that's interesting. And it turns out they're looking for this guy called the Bhagwan Kalki to rise up. And we've got a picture. As a matter of fact, I'll probably have it on the front cover of a magazine, maybe in January of 2021. And you've got this guy, and you've got this guy on a white horse who's bowing down before him, which kind of looks like the rider of the white horse, Revelation, bowing down before the beast. So the false prophet bowing down before the beast. So you start adding a couple billion here, billion or so there, billion or so there, it starts to add up. Then you say, wait a second, you missed a massive group. What about the Muslims? Turns out, the Muslims say that they're going to make a deal, sounds like the deal of Daniel chapter 9:27, by the way, and that the Romans are going to break it. And then the Antichrist is going to reign. And they got all that, they basically got that pretty well right. Unfortunately, because they don't accept Jesus, they won't know, but they actually believe that this kind of a deal is going to happen, and they're going to be part of it. Add all those numbers up, and you get pretty close to the 7 billion people on the planet. And this woman was trying to tell me that everybody's going to know it when it happens. You say, but the evangelical Protestants will know. Well, as it turns out, they happen to be in the United States. As I mentioned a few moments ago, there's these prophecies that the great monarch is going to destroy the English-speaking peoples. And we believe that'll happen toward the start of the Great Tribulation. So yeah, I'm sure there'll be some Protestant types and some others who will be skeptical about what's going on, but there won't be too many of them around to complain, relatively speaking, to the entire side. So anyway, I've digressed a little bit, but I would also comment that the old Radio Church of God, Worldwide Church of God, refer to Fatima prophecies, Mayan prophecies, by the way, and other ones, not to tell us we are supposed to obey them, but to warn us that this is how Satan has been deceiving people and will do so in the time of the end, and that's what we do in the Continuing Church of God as well. Okay. All right, verse 13, getting back to Deuteronomy 18. You should be blameless before the Lord your God. For these nations which you will possess, listen to soothsayers and diviners, but as for you, the Lord your God has not appointed such for you. But the rest of the people are going to listen to this stuff. Okay? This is not just some prophecy. People read this and think, oh yeah, sure, that was for these people back thousands of years ago. Who cares? It doesn't matter for the future. It will matter in the future. We know in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 talks about signs and lying wonders. And throughout history, we've seen signs and lying wonders, including those supposedly associated with Jesus' mother Mary, which has persuaded or convinced or been used by Satan to help convince the Greco-Romans why their faiths are correct. Because Mary only appears to them. Therefore, they are the chosen ones, etc., etc. Verse 15, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me in the midst of your brethren, him you will hear, according to all you desired of the Lord your God in Horeb in the day of the assembly, saying, let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, let me not see this great fire, lest I die. And we know that Jesus was raised up. We have in the Church of God a few groups that claim to have prophetic people, none of which had hands laid upon them for that particular position, other than myself, and all of which have been proven to make false prophecies. I mentioned also there's a false apostle out there. I didn't call him a false apostle, but I will right now, but I won't name him, who's again making additional prophecies and predictions during the Feast of Tabernacles, which will not come to pass. And he uses mind control techniques as far as I'm concerned. The Bible calls them covetous words. Again, his end will come, I think, relatively soon from now. Anyway, going down to verse 17, the Lord said to me, what they've spoken is good. I'll raise up to them a prophet like you among their brethren. I'll put my words in his mouth. They'll speak to them when I command them. It should be whoever will not hear my words, when he speaks in my name, I will require it of him. But a prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or to speak the name of the other gods, that prophet shall die. Let's talk about that for a moment. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Unless I'm reading the Bible, that's thus says the Lord, all right? Anything else I say, hopefully I'm right, but I'm not claiming any type of infallibility. If I get a special vision or dream or something that I believe is from God, I will make that clear. Otherwise, I'm trying, like others who speak, to teach what the Word of God says. Okay? I have various opinions on lots of subjects. I don't know how many things I'm wrong about. Most of the rest of you don't know how many things you're wrong about either. Okay? And I've had people try to tell me, if you're some kind of a prophet, then predict some sporting event or some idiotic, useless thing. Kind of reminds me of when they were beating Jesus and they hit him, prophesy this to us. Or when he's dying, well, if you're the Son of God, prove it, get off of there. It's like, no. But you notice it says, verse 20, the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name, which I haven't commanded them. And in the New Testament, by the way, it says to prophesy only according to faith. Okay? We've got to be very careful. Even the Apostle Paul, who called himself a prophet, was wrong, by the way. In Acts 27, verse 10, he said, I perceive that people are going to die. Some people are going to die. They didn't die. He was wrong. He was an apostle and he was a prophet. Okay? And in my own case, in the first the couple of dreams that I had, I was more like Jeremiah. In Jeremiah chapter 32, after something finally happened, he said, then I knew it was from God. Up until then, Jeremiah said, I kind of thought it probably was, but I didn't know. I wasn't sure. Okay, so I just want to clarify that as well here. Okay, where was I? Okay, verse 21. And if you say in your heart, how shall I know the word which the Lord has not spoken? When the prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, a thing does not happen or come to pass, that's the thing which the Lord has not spoken. That prophet has spoken presumptuously, and you shall not be afraid of him. And I won't mention 2 or 3 so-called Church of God prophets who come to mind, but they said things that did not come to pass. For example, and I'll give one specific example, claiming that Joseph Tkach Sr. was the man of sin is absolutely false. The guy then changed it to make it Joe Tkach Jr., which is also false. But since the senior died, that proves it was false on that particular thing, and he was saying this is what God taught him, and that was not the case. He also has some weird things about the Stone of Destiny, some other stuff. And then there was the other guy who said the Great Tribulation was going to happen in 2008 or 9, and we might have a presidential election in 2008, but no new president would come on in 2009. Just to refresh you with your memory, we got a president by the name of Barack Obama, who served for 8 years. Okay, so this person was totally wrong. He's made a bunch of other false prophecies since, and has been shown to be wrong. On the other hand, the New Testament says to test the spirits. And according to Norman Edwards, who was formerly the board member of the Global Church of God, this means that don't say God could not have any prophets or apostles or whatever other type of positions he may have. So test the spirits means some will pass the test. Don't assume that none will. Kind of reminds me of Jesus' parable of the talents. He passes them out, and you got one person who decides it's better to ignore everything. I won't support the work. I won't do a work. It's safer to do nothing. Because there are a bunch of false prophets and false business opportunities, false works out there. I'm better off doing nothing. And Jesus condemned them for that. Okay? All right. Anyway, you don't need to be afraid of me either, by the way. There shouldn't be any reason. Now, if you do stuff you're not supposed to, and I have to talk to you about it, which I don't like to do, then that maybe no. Okay, verse 19. When the Lord your God has cut off the nations whose land the Lord your God is giving you, and you dispossess them and dwell in the cities and in their houses, you shall separate 3 cities for yourself in the midst of the land which the Lord your God has given you to possess. And you shall prepare roads for yourself and divide 3 parts of the territories of the land which the Lord has given you to inherit, that any manslayer may flee there. Now let me just comment for a second. Most of us are getting spoiled now, getting used to things like GPS. A lot of the younger generation can't even properly read a map anymore. But back then, they didn't have GPS. But they also didn't have a lot of roads. Now, look, see how important this was to God that somebody could flee. He made sure that they had these cities designated, and a road, you knew this is the road you were supposed to hightail it on if you accidentally killed somebody. Verse 4. And this is the case of the manslayer who flees there, that he may live. Whoever kills his neighbor unintentionally, not having hatred in the time past, as when a man goes in the woods with his neighbor to cut timber, and swings his stroke of the axe to cut down a tree, and the head slips from the handle and strikes his neighbor, so he dies. He flees to one of the cities and lives. Lest the avenger of blood, when his anger is hot, pursues the manslayer, take him, because the way is long, and kills him, though he's not deserving of death, since he had not hated the victim in the past. Therefore I commanded you, saying, you shall separate 3 cities for yourself. Now let me stop here for a couple of things. So first of all, if you were out there with somebody with your axe chopping down trees, and by the way, this is not common now, but it was really common then. Where do you think you got firewood, built houses, done everything else? A lot of other things you needed trees for. You better make sure your axe handle was on really good. And then notice this other part about if you had hated them in the past and you accidentally killed them, you couldn't just flee. Now we're supposed to be careful. Jesus said in Matthew 5, 43 to 45, and I'll just paraphrase it, you've heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But Jesus said, I tell you to love those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully persecute you and speak evil of you. So I have to do that a lot, by the way. There's a lot of people in that category regarding myself and the church. So So you couldn't say, aha, I'll go out in the woods and I'll accidentally kill this guy I don't like or gal I don't like. Because that, you didn't get protection for that one. So you had to be really, 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 really careful about people that you hated or didn't like, or that you were perceived to not like. Okay, you had to treat them better. It wasn't just Jesus saying this in the New Testament. This is setting the stage in the Old Testament. You better be really careful. Okay, let's see. Verse 8, now if the Lord your God enlarges your territory and gives you the land which he promised to give your fathers, and you shall keep these commandments and do them which I command you today, and love the Lord your God, to walk always in his ways, then you shall add 3 more cities yourself besides these 3. And they ended up having 3 on one side of the Jordan, 3 on the other side. Lest innocent blood be shed in the midst of your land, and the Lord your God has given you as an inheritance. The guilt of bloodshed be on you. If anyone hates his neighbor, lies and waits for him, rises against him, strikes him mortally, so he dies, and he flees to one of these cities, then the elder of his city shall send and bring him from there and deliver him over the hand of the avenger of blood, and he will die. And you might even be innocent. Okay, this time, maybe you did accidentally kill the guy, but they're like, oh no, we knew you hated him. You're guilty, so you had to be particularly careful. Your eyes shall not pity him, but you shall put away all the guilt of innocent blood from Israel, that it may go well with you. You shall not remove your neighbor's landmark, which men of old have set in your inheritance, which you shall inherit in the land which the Lord your God has given you to possess. Now you might think that's totally irrelevant today because we've got modern borders and surveyors and all this kind of stuff. Well, we do have all that, but guess what? Things don't always happen the way they're supposed to. In our case, we had this exact problem. Where we live, based on zoning, we all have to have a certain amount of acreage. It can't be any more or less. It could be more, but it can't be any less. Turns out a building was on our side of the property line. And somebody either built it or didn't know exactly where the line was. And I figured this out and realized if we ever wanted to sell our house, this is a big problem because this is on our land. So what do you do about this, and particularly in light of the command here? Well, first of all, it wasn't the people who lived next door to us who had built it. Okay? So I didn't accuse them of doing anything, but I explained to them, I think we have a problem here. So we called out the surveyor who surveyed it, I don't know, 10 or 20 years, I guess 20 years before, and he found his old markers and said, oh yeah, that's not theirs. And what happened was, where we live is kind of hilly, and they had almost no flat land, and they took a little bit of flat land, which somebody did, which ended up was our land. Now again, this is before we moved in or the people next to us moved in, okay? But I finally figured this out. So basically, we met together. I didn't try to push my legal rights, which is what I could have said. Look, that land is better, it's there, it's mine, okay? On the other hand, they could say, they didn't put it there, you lose it, the building's been here for years. Okay, I mentioned before in a previous sermon, while we do have certain legal rights, we need to be careful how we push them, because you may go and lose everything. Anyway, to make a long story short, we agreed to redraw the property line. They ended up with better property because they ended up with some flat land they didn't have. We lost some theoretically usable land, but it wasn't that usable, and we wouldn't have used it anyway. So anyway, I actually had to pay attention to this particular statute in Deuteronomy 19 because it actually affected us. So sometimes you read this stuff, oh, I'll never have to deal with any of this. You might be surprised. Hopefully, none of you ever will. But we did. Okay, verse 15. One witness shall not rise against a man concerning iniquity, any iniquity or sin that he commits. By the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, the matter will be established. Now, Jesus quoted that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. And we've had some people, there's a person who is high up, so I won't mention his name, that if you have a worldwide background, you would have heard of. And I was talking to him, and we get along fairly well, but he said something to me, I don't want to hear anything about dreams. It doesn't matter if the Bible says he'll be in the New Testament, and supposedly he's a New Testament Christian and all this kind of stuff. But the same with the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. Most of you are aware, who are with us, that not only did I have a couple of dreams, but somebody who came with us in New Zealand had a dream prior to the start of our church. And she didn't know me. She never heard of me. I never heard of her. And the only way I found out about it was when I went to the Feast of Tabernacles and I'd given my first sermon on the Book of the Law. She came up to me because she wanted to talk to me and explained about this dream that she had. And she told everybody in New Zealand about the dream in December of 2012. And it was interesting, but she had a dream that 10 people, including Shirley Gestro, went somewhere else. And that's what happened, by the way. 10 people left that particular fellowship and came with us. We weren't declared. We didn't exist at the time she had that dream. And until about 2-3 weeks after that dream, I hadn't made a decision because I thought we were going to be able to reconcile matters with where we were working. And I mention this because it says at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. And that's what Jesus said. And of course, many of you know we've had others who've had dreams associated with the Continuing Church of God that have been fulfilled. But she didn't know what that dream meant. She talked to her husband, and he finally said that it was me. And again, this was after it happened, but at first they weren't sure what it meant. But we have people these days who won't believe that kind of stuff. On the one hand, you got people say, all the churches of God are the same because we all keep the Sabbath, have the holy days, avoid unclean meat, things like that. On the other hand, they say God's Spirit's not working in any of the groups because what kind of miracles people have. Now, all the churches of God that I'm aware of, by the way, nearly all of them, legitimately have had healings. Okay, so I'm not standing here to tell you that only the Continuing Church of God has God's Spirit doing anything at all. That's not our position. It's never been our position. It's never been my position. But we do seem to be the only one that God has been using with dreams. And we've had at least 6 or 7, I think at least 7 that I've recorded, and you can read about them, that are specifically associated with us, as opposed to somebody who just has a personal dream about themselves. Okay? That's a separate category whatsoever. And I've heard of that in other churches of God. But nothing quite like what we've had as far as the formation of the church, why people should be with the church, etc., and some other things associated with it. And so I believe that's a spiritual way that we're showing that we're different. So it's not just the intellect. Okay, I believe if you use the intellect in the Bible, you look at the depth of our literature. This should be. I hope it would be persuasive, particularly if God's calling you to be a Philadelphian. But in addition to that, I believe having those particular type of signs, which the New Testament said will be in the end time, you would think people who claim to believe what the New Testament said would believe that. But they rationalize it away. They don't want to believe it. They say dreams don't count. And it's like, okay, which part of the Word of God don't you believe? It kind of reminds me of those who claim sola scriptura. Remember how this book got up before? These people Protestants claim sola scriptura. Until it came to things like what day of the week do you go to church on, what holy days do you keep, clean and unclean meats, what God's plan of salvation is, what the Godhead is, what God's plan is for humanity, etc., etc., etc. But they claim to believe the Bible. And we got people in the Church of God who've decided that there's certain parts of the Bible that in the New Testament they want to believe. All right, going back here, chapter 19, verse 16. If a false witness rises against any man who testifies against the wrongdoing, then both the men in the controversy shall stand before the Lord, before the priests, and judges who serve in those days. And the judges shall make careful inquiry, and indeed, if the witness is false witness, who testified falsely against his brother, then you shall do to him as he thought to have done to his brother, so you shall put away the evil from among you. And those who remain shall hear and fear, and hereafter not commit such evil among you. Your eye shall not pity, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. What this is saying is people who make false accusations are supposed to have happen to them what they wanted to happen to others. I really, 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 really wish this happened in the United States. Okay? Now, I'm going to talk about race for a half a moment. Not a lot of it, but a little bit. Yes, there is racism, and yes, it's wrong. But people who say things happen for racial reasons when they did not, and I just read another one who faked something, that just fans the flames of hatred and gets people to hate one another. Okay? We do not want in the United States white people to harass black people to harass white people, Hispanics to do to either one or both or whatever, or Asians or all the rest of it. And if people make it up, lie about it, that just makes it worse. If people provide bricks to protesters, that just makes it worse. Okay? The people who are lying, giving false witness, false testimony should be dealt with. And the same thing we run into nowadays on sexual harassment and things such as rape. You've got women who are telling the truth, but people don't know if they can believe them, and you've got women who don't tell the truth, and then people's reputations are destroyed. And to be blunt, in the United States, in my opinion, we don't come close to persecuting false witnesses to the degree that we should. Okay? In the old days, the death penalty for rape was, rape, the penalty was death, and for a false witness against rape, it would have been death penalty. We don't do that here, but if we did, we could solve a lot of issues. And sometimes in this country, as you all know, politics gets involved. If one side wants something or the other, they've decided who they're going to believe or not believe based on politics. And that's not supposed to be the case either. You know, we read earlier in the book of Deuteronomy, you're not supposed to show partiality to the wealthy or to somebody who's important or whatever. But here in the United States, sadly, we've gotten so divided that it really depends on which side you like. And if you like that side, then you like their witnesses. If you don't like that side, you don't like their witnesses. And it shouldn't be that way. But it is. Anyway, we'll go to chapter 20. Now, chapter 20 does not have a huge amount that seems directly relevant to us because we're pacifists. And say, what's that got to do with it? Well, we'll go. This was what God wanted done for the children of Israel, physical people, to clear out the land. Back in chapter 20, verse 1. When you go out to battle against your enemies, see the horses and the chariots, the people who are more numerous than you, don't be afraid of them, for the Lord your God is with you, brought you up from the land of Egypt. And again, we're not supposed to say, it's too tough with the Greco-Romans and the atheists and the agnostics and stuff we've got to deal with. So it shall be, we're on the verge of the battle, the priest shall approach, speak to people, to say to them, Hear, O Israel, today you're on the verge of battle with your enemies. Don't let your heart faint, don't be afraid, don't tremble, be afraid because of them. For the Lord your God, He goes with you, He'll fight against you, against your enemies, to save you. And God will do the same for us today. Behind me it says, Do not fear, little flock, for it's your Father's good pleasure to give Him the kingdom. Luke 12:32. God can fight our spiritual battles and our physical ones as well. Then the officers will speak to the people, saying, What man is there who built a new house and hasn't dedicated it? Let him go to the house, lest he die in battle, someone else dedicate it. Who's planted a vineyard and hasn't eaten of it? Let him go and return to his house, lest he die in battle, another man eat it. Which man's betrothed of a woman and hasn't married her yet? Let him return to the house, lest he die in battle, another man marry her. In the United States, though, they had the opposite thing. They would have people get married just for World War II or Vietnam or whatever to get money or whatever. The Bible kind of said to do it that way. Verse 8, the officer shall speak further to the people and say, What man is there who is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go and return to his house, lest the heart of his brethren faint like his heart. Now, all this is fearful from time to time, but we're still supposed to proceed. We're supposed to trust in God with all our heart and lean not to our understanding. In all our ways acknowledge Him, He'll direct our paths. Sometimes it is difficult, however. So it shall be when the officers have finished speaking to the people, that they'll make captains of the armies to lead the people. You go near a city, against it proclaim and offer peace to it. It shall be if they accept your offer of peace, open to it, then they'll be placed in tribute to serve you. But if they won't make peace with you, you'll make war against it, and you'll besiege it. The Lord your God delivers it in your hand. You'll strike every male with the sword. With the women, the little ones, and livestock which in the city and spoil, you shall plunder for yourself. You shall eat the enemy's plunder which the Lord gives you. In the old days, by the way, now that's how the soldiers really made their money. And this was actually throughout history, particularly in older days, the big motivator for young men to fight. Particularly if you came from a poor family, you have a chance to go out and end up with a lot if you win. You kind of figured if you die, you're dead. If you win, you win. But anyway, that's what was done. Thus you shall do all the cities which are very far from you, and not the cities of these nations. But the cities of the people which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance, you shall let nothing breathe that remains alive. We shall utterly destroy the Hittite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, the Jebusite, just the Lord your God has commanded you. Lest they teach you to do according to their abominations which they've done to their gods, and you sin against the Lord your God. And sadly, we've seen within the Greco-Roman Protestant world that they've picked up many of those abominations. As well, of course, as you got the New Age and all the rest of them too. When you besiege a city for a long time while making war against it to take it, you shall not destroy the trees by wielding the axe against them. You shall cut, if you can eat of them. Don't cut them down. So you've heard the expression, all's fair in love and war. No, God said not all is fair. And no, you can't destroy the trees that produce fruit. The fruit trees, God said, no, those are too valuable. We don't care how important you think they are for your battle. You leave them. Okay? For the tree of the fields of man's food. Only trees which you know aren't trees for food, those you can destroy and cut them down to build siege works in the city with war until it's subdued. So God said, yeah, I told you to do a siege, but no, there's some limits on what you can do. Chapter 21. If anyone is found slain in the field in the land which the Lord your God has given you to possess, and it's not known who killed him, then your elders and your judges shall go out and measure the distance from the slain man to the surrounding cities. It should be that the elders in the city that's nearest to the slain man will take a heifer, which has not been worked and which has not been pulled on a yoke. The elders of that city shall bring the heifer down the valley flowing with water, which is neither plowed nor sown, and they shall break the heifer's neck there in the valley. Then the priests and the sons of Levite shall come near. The Lord your God has chosen to minister to him and bless in the name of the Lord. By their word, every controversy, every fault shall be settled. And the elders of the city nearest to the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the valley. They shall answer and say, our hands have not shed this blood, nor have our hands seen it. Provide atonement, O Lord, for your people whom you have redeemed. Do not lay innocent blood in the charge of your people Israel. Atonement shall be provided on their behalf for the blood. So you shall put away the guilt of innocent blood from among you when you do not do what's right, or when you do what is right in the sight of the God. So yes, they found somebody who was dead. They were supposed to try to figure out what happened. And the city that was closest to had to pay a price to it. I assume that would encourage law and order also in the city. Verse 10. Now this next section is a little bit odd, to me at least, and probably to many of you. When you go out to war against your enemies, the Lord your God delivers them in your hand, and you take them captive. You see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire her, and you take her for your wife. Now in the old days, with other places, when others would go out and win a battle, they would take the women, ravish them right then, and decide if they want to keep them later. It says, no, you can't do that. It says, then you can bring her home to your house, and you should shave her head and trim her nails. Probably don't look quite so good with their heads shaven. And she'll put off the clothes of her captivity, remain in your house, and she can mourn for her mother and father for a full month. And after that, you can go into her and to be her husband, and she can be your wife. So God says, all right, you might see someone really attractive and think, okay, she's for you, and you get her because of this war. No, you can maybe do that, but you got to wait. You get to wait a month, give you a chance to see what she's like. So you can't just go out and do what the Gentile soldiers were doing. It shall be, if you have no delight in her, you got to set her free. And you can't sell her if you've done this. You shall not treat her brutally because you've humbled her. So God says, okay, not only you've got a month to think about this, you better understand that you can't sell her. This is the way it's going to be. Right. Now, chapter 15, verse 15. If any man has two wives, one loved and the other unloved, and they've borne him children, both the loved and the unloved, and the firstborn son is of hers who's unloved, it shall be, on the day he bequeaths his possession to his sons, he must not bestow firstborn status to the son of the loved wife in preference to the son of the unloved. So it can't be that if a person had two wives and let's say one nagged him constantly about switching the inheritance, God says, nope, this is the deal. You got two wives, that's your problem, and the inheritance is going to be the way it is. The firstborn, by the way, son would get twice as much as anybody else and from the inheritance, and they weren't allowed to change that. But the man acknowledged the son of the unloved wife as a firstborn by giving him a double portion of all he has, for he's the beginning of his strength, and the right of the firstborn is his. Now, verse 18. The man's got a rebellious, a stubborn son who won't obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother. When they've chastened him and he won't heed him, then his father and mother shall take him hold of him, bring him to the elders of the city, the gate of the city, say to the elders of the city, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He won't obey our voice. He's a glutton and a drunkard. Okay? Yes, they had those problems back then too. Then all the men of the city shall come and stone him to death with stones, so she'll put away evil from among you, and all Israel will hear and fear. But we don't do that now, of course. It's probably one of the reasons we end up with gangs and some other things like this. You get stubborn, rebellious sons. Or a lot of times, the way the welfare system in the United States is set up, we seem to encourage this. We encourage people to not be married, and then so women are raising boys, and they can raise them well, and you can raise a boy well without a husband, but a lot of times when the boys get a bit older, it gets more difficult, and they become more rebellious, and we see this is not the only factor in causing gangs, but I do think it is a significant one. Verse 22, if a man commits a sin deserving of death, he's to be put to death. You can hang him on a tree. His body shall not remain overnight on the tree, but you shall surely bury him that day. So you will not defile the land which the Lord your God has given you for inheritance. He who is hanged is accursed of God. In the old days, the Romans, if they impaled you one way or the other, they keep you out there for a long time. God said, don't do it that way. Chapter 22. You shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep going astray and hide yourself from them. You surely bring it back to your brother. So back then, that was a lot of your wealth, if you had an ox or some sheep, and you weren't supposed to say, it's not my problem. God said, no, actually it is. If your brother's not near you or you don't know him, so it could be somebody you don't even know, some stranger. Then you shall bring it to your own house and remain with you until your brother seeks it. And you restore it to him. Nowadays, at least in the United States, what you're supposed to do if you find something of massive value is to turn it over to the police. And if nobody claims it, by the way, after some period of time, they're supposed to give it back, give it to you. You should do the same with his donkey, and you should do the same with his garment or any lost thing of your brother's which he's lost and you found. You should do likewise, and you must not hide yourself. Now, in modern times, no, if you find a piece of clothing on the ground, you don't have to go and turn it to the police. Why am I telling you this? But this is not the same. In the old days, clothes were really, really, really expensive. You know the story of Samson in Judges chapter 14. He did this riddle and basically said, if he's right, if you don't get it, I get a change of your clothes. And the guys he made a deal with couldn't figure it out, so he went to his wife and said, look, did you bring us to your wedding to make us poor? And as those of us living in the United States, what do you mean? Getting rid of one set of clothes would make us poor? No. But back then it did, because, as I mentioned in the past, it was very, very difficult, very expensive to have clothes. And people didn't have much, and they were really, really expensive. And you had to work a long time in order to get them. So, but nowadays, no, if you see somebody's dirty T-shirt on the ground, just don't worry about that. Now, if you find a suitcase, maybe that would be a different situation or something like that. Verse 4, you shall not see your brother's donkey or his ox fall down the road and hide yourself from them. You shall surely help them, lift them up again. A woman shall not wear anything that pertains to a man, nor shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all who do such are an abomination to the Lord your God. In modern society, they seem to think this is a good thing, that we should celebrate this. We do not celebrate this. We condemn this. The Bible says to tell the children of Israel that their sins, and this, those of the descendants of Jacob, and this is certainly one of them that's getting celebrated by the media, and that is totally wrong. We do not support cross-dressing because the Bible teaches against it. We don't believe it's good for the person doing it. Verse 6, if a bird's nest happens to be before you along the way, if any tree or on the ground with young ones or eggs, and the mother sits on the young or the eggs, you shall not take the mother with its young. You shall surely let the mother go and take the young for yourself, that it may be well for you, with you and prolong your days. This also ensured, by the way, that you didn't eliminate a species, okay? You let the productive breeding mother go away, and then you eat the eggs or the young ones. Verse 8, when you build a new house, then you shall make a parapet around your roof, so that you may not bring guilt of bloodshed upon your household if anyone falls from it. Now, in the old days, remember they didn't have air conditioning, and it would get hot, so people would meet on top of people's houses. So what they'd have you do is basically, we use railing in modern days, but they've put like a wall around it so somebody wouldn't fall off. And you don't want somebody to fall off, because if you consider to be the one who accidentally had them die, guess what? You had to flee again. Okay? So you may not bring guilt of bloodshed on your household if anyone falls from it. You say, well, it's not my fault they fell. And the Bible says, well, you should have made it safer for them. So yes, there were safety rules, building codes, if you will, back then. Verse 9, you shall not sow your vineyard with different kinds of seed, lest the yield of the seed which you've sown and the fruit of your vineyard be defiled. You should not plow with an ox and a donkey together. They don't like each other. If they get together, the breath of, I think the ox doesn't like, the ox will tend to kill itself, actually, if it's yoked together, because it will hurt itself. It doesn't want to be near it. You shall not make a garment of different sorts, such as wool and linen mixed together. Basically, animal cloth, if you will, or threads, and plant threads do not mix well together in clothing. They'll tend to separate one. The animal one will almost always be stronger. It makes an inferior product, so God said don't do it. The old Worldwide Church of God looked at this, decided that that was fine, but that we don't really need to worry about polyester or synthetic fabrics if they're mixed. But there have been several times my wife and I were shopping years and years ago that we would not buy certain garments because they had a mixture of, let's say, cotton and wool or something along that line. Verse 12, you shall make tassels on the four corners of your clothing from which you cover yourself. This was done in the past, but when you look in the New Testament, for example, and the Apostle Paul was arrested, and they said he was an Egyptian. If he was a Hebrew, he would have had the tassels on the outside, and everybody would have seen it, but he wasn't doing that, so we don't believe it is something we need to do anymore. And I've got some writings about that I'm not going to go into today, but we don't feel that that's necessary. And we don't see any evidence that early Christians found it necessary as well. And so since we're supposed to contend for the faith once for all delivered to saints, that doesn't include us doing that. Verse 13, if a man takes a wife and goes into her and detests her and charges her with shameful conduct and brings a bad name on her and says, look, I took this woman, I came to her, I found she wasn't a virgin, then the father and the mother of the young woman shall take and turn out the evidence of the young woman's virginity to the elders of the city of the gate. The young woman's father will say, look, I gave my daughter to this man, his wife, he detests her, and now he charged her with shameful conduct, found your daughter was not a virgin, that these are the evidence of her virginity, so this probably would have been like a sheet or something. He shall spread the cloth before the elders of the city, take that man and punish him, fine him 100 shekels of silver, which was a lot, give it to the father of the young woman because he brought bad name on a virgin in Israel. So he wasn't allowed to bear false witness against her. She'll be his wife. He won't be able to divorce her all his days. But if this is true, and the evidence of virginity are not found, he shall bring out the young woman to the door of his father's house, and the men of the city to stone her to death, because she has done this disgraceful thing. So for you should put away evil among you. Now let me not go over this. Go past this. I'm going to talk about this for just a moment. A couple of things here. This was one of the reasons the divorce was allowed in the New Testament, is if someone lied about their sexual background. But if a woman was to be married and she was not a virgin because she was either married before or for whatever reason she was not, and she tells this guy before they got married she was not, then guys know that's not an excuse. Okay? This is only if someone misleads you and lies to you. If they're not misleading or lying to you, you know what you got yourself into. So that's just not applicable there. All right, verse 22, if a man's found lying with a woman married to a husband, then both of them should be put to death. The man who lies with the woman and the woman, so you put away evil from Israel. A young woman who's a virgin is betrothed to her husband, a man finds her in the city and lies with her, you should bring them both out to the gate of the city. You shall stone them with stones, because a woman did not cry out in the city, because she humbled his neighbor's wife, so put away evil from among you. Now, this is a different situation. Nowadays, in the cities, we can make it so you can't hear anything, so no, it's not the same. If a man finds a betrothed woman in the countryside, forces her to lie with her, she's the only one with her, she do nothing to the young woman, she hasn't done anything, no sin deserving of death. But the man, this is like when a man rises against his neighbor and kills them, so is this matter. He found her in the countryside, she cried out, there's no one to save her. The man finds a young woman who is a virgin, who's not betrothed, sees her, lies with her, and they find out. The man who does this, okay, now if we switch gears here, will be give her father 50 shekels because his wife. This is not a case of rape. And a man shall not take his father's wife, nor uncover his father's bed, which basically means she's not supposed to look at your mother's nudity. He who is emasculated by, I'm sorry. I shouldn't say I'm sorry, but I just noticed the time. Let me see this chapter if I'm going to try to cover this. I'm going to cover it. In the old days, he who was emasculated or crushed by mutilization cannot come to the assembly of the Lord. Only one of illegitimate birth shall not enter the assembly of the Lord till the 10th generation. So they were really trying to discourage fornication, amongst other things. The Ammonite and the Moabite shall not enter the assembly of the Lord, even the 10th generation, nor his descendants shall enter the assembly of the Lord forever, because they didn't meet you with bread, water on the road, which you came out to Egypt, because they were hired against you. Balaam, the son of Behor, to curse you. Nevertheless, the Lord your God would not listen to Balaam, but the Lord your God turned a curse and a blessing to you, because the Lord your God loves you. And people will curse us, but God will bless us as long as we will obey Him. You shall not seek their peace, nor their prosperity of their days forever. You shall not abhor an Edomite, for he's your brother. You shall not abhor an Egyptian, because you're an alien in his land. The children of the third generation born of them may enter the assembly of the Lord. Verse 9, when the army goes out against your enemies, you shall keep yourself from every wicked thing. If there's a man among you who becomes unclean by some occurrence during the night, he shall go outside the camp, he shall not come inside the camp. But it should be when evening comes, he shall wash with water, and the sun sets, and he may come to the camp. Now, I'm not going to read this, but in Hebrews 9 and 10 talks about various washings and such, and those are not required these days. However, the idea of being clean and washing yourself often is a good idea. It's one of the reasons why when the bubonic plague hit, those who were Jews had a tendency to not have it as much because they were cleaner in a lot of different ways than the Gentiles. Also, you should have a place outside the camp where you may go out. You may have an implement among your equipment that when you sit down outside and dig and turn and cover your refuse. Okay, you weren't supposed to find human waste on the ground. For the Lord your God walks in the midst of your camp to deliver you and give your enemies over to you. Therefore your camp shall be holy. Shall see no unclean thing among you and turn away from you. But instead, because if you don't do that, what you'll end up having is all kinds of disease. Cholera, types of diarrhea, and all this type of thing. And God said, don't do that. And notice he said to put it in the ground, not in the water. People, of course, were putting it in the water. And nowadays, they do put it in the water. However, they do clean it. But in the old days, they put it in the ground, which makes a whole lot of sense because it becomes fertilizer for the ground. Verse 15, you shall not give back to his master the slave who escaped from his master to you. He may dwell with you in your midst in the place which he chooses with your gates, where it seems best to him. You shall not oppress him. This is probably where you've got people who supported the Underground Railroad during the pre-Civil War time. And actually, the town that I lived in for a while, you can't really find it on a map. It's called Salem. Sometimes it shows up. We were actually the last stop on the Underground Railroad a long, long time ago. At least that's what my mother told me. Anyway, verse 17, there shall be no ritual harlot of the daughters of Israel, or perverted one of the sons of Israel. What's this talking about? One of the reasons that the pagans were pagan is because the young pagan men could go into the temples, and they had women there, and they would serve as temple prostitutes. And this is how the pagan priests got all their money. Okay, and they seem to like that. The stuff about a perverted one, we're pretty sure this is a reference to being homosexual. Again, it's telling you not to do that for money or any other purpose. Verse 18, you shall not bring the wages of a harlot or the price of a dog, again this is referring to a male harlot, to the house of the Lord. But that's exactly what the Gentiles were doing, all the pagans were doing. Your God, or any vowed offering, both of these are an abomination to the Lord your God. And what gets me is they don't believe this book, but they don't like us to call this stuff an abomination. You shall not charge interest to your brother, interest on money or food or anything that's lent out at interest. To a foreigner you may charge interest, but to your brother you shall not charge interest, that the Lord your God may bless you in land which you set your hand, which you're going to possess. Now when I mentioned the parable of the talents, Jesus said it was totally fine to leave your money with, let's say, a bank or something to get interest. He said that was okay. This is talking about people who are poor, basically. We're supposed to loan to them at interest. Verse 21, you make a vow to the Lord your God. You shall not delay to pay it, for the Lord your God will surely require of it, and it shall be a sin to you. And it says in Ecclesiastes, and I didn't write it down exactly, but it's better to not vow than to vow and not pay. Because that would be bearing false witness. It doesn't matter if it was only between you and God. But if you abstain from vowing, it shall not be a sin to you. So it's okay, but sometimes people will vow to do something because of peer pressure, because they think it looks good to make pledges in public or whatever. That which was gone from your lips you shall keep and perform. For you voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God that you have promised with your mouth. So you've got to do what you said you're going to do. When you come into your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat the fill of grapes at your pleasure, but you'll not put it in any container. So in the old days, if you were walking around, saw an apple tree, you just go ahead and eat it. But you weren't supposed to go and bring a bushel basket with you. Take it. When you come into your neighbor's standing grain, you can pluck the heads with your hand, but you shall not bring a sickle to your neighbor's standing grain. So it's like, okay, yeah, you can go through. And if any of you have gone out and actually taken a head of grain, but I've done it, both from wheat and from weeds. My dad would hunt, and we'd go out pheasant hunting, and there'd be all kinds of weeds, and I'd get bored, and I'd grab some, and I'd start to eat it. So that was okay. So anyway, we've gone through the first 23 chapters now of the book of Deuteronomy, and I intend to start tomorrow on chapter 24. So this is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Continuing Church of God.